Well, howdy YouTube family. It is Bolt CRNA coming to you with another day's topic. Now, I know it's been a little bit and I have been kind of away from the YouTube game, but I am back. I'm gonna do a couple videos. No guarantees that I'm gonna keep uploading every week or anything like that, but of course I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok and Facebook. I have a page for you guys over there too. So you can always keep up with me if you're interested, but I am very busy with doing mock interviews and also just working as a CRNA and living life. So shooting weekly videos are just difficult for me to do right now. Maybe I might get back to it, but in the meantime, we're gonna come to you with another topic. Today, we're gonna talk to you about what is the schedule like in CRNA school, and specifically, what was the schedule like for my program in my CRNA school. Let's get into it. All right, so I made a list because I can't remember everything off the top of my head, and I'll go by semester to semester. So year one, it's 3 years, 9 semesters. So year one, first semester of my CRNA program was Anatomy and Physiology 1 and then 2. They had it broken up so that you had like 2.5 months of Anatomy and Physiology 1, and then the other 2.5 months was Anatomy and Physiology 2, and then, you know, it's Christmas time. So it was pretty rapid. You know, you move through those classes very quickly. If you remember A&P from undergrad, it was an entire semester typically. Like A&P 1 was 1 semester, A&P 2 was a whole nother semester. Well, imagine they cram both classes into 1 semester, and then they also make it 10 times harder. Like, you're studying A&P on a microcellular level now. It's not just generally how does the flow through the heart work, it's like how does the electrical movement of the heart work. So much more intense. And then outside of A&P, which was probably the hardest class in first semester and the one that some people failed out based off of, the next one I remember was statistics, which is more leaning on research statistics. So they're kind of focusing in on getting you ready for your doctoral project, getting you ready for doing all the research you're going to be doing for this doctoral project. And you're having to understand statistics and kind of statistics on a high level. I'll just tell you, this was not a fun class. I did not enjoy this. I struggled through, but I made it. You can make it too. Another course that's kind of an interesting one, that's really just because I went to a university that had a Christian background to it. We had to take like a 1 credit hour faith and science course, and essentially that's not a class that most of you are going to have to take. Beyond that, we took a clinical assessment class, which is just in general, it actually was taught with the NP students. So it was just general assessment of the human body, as if someone was coming into your clinic and sitting down before you from head to toe, essentially. So imagine nursing school head to toe assessment, but a little bit more of the provider role, kind of like how nurse practitioners do. And the CRNAs, we all took that along with the NP students at that school. And it wasn't really related to anesthesia. There were certain topics and things that were just like breast exams and things like that, they just told us like, don't worry too much about this one because we're not going to be doing that. But in general, you know, the other types of assessments were really good skills to have. And then the last class was a professional aspects course. This course was just teaching us about the history of anesthesia. Where did CRNAs come from? You know, who was the mother of anesthesia? Who opened up the first school of anesthesia, you know, a long, long time ago? And just the progress of the career through to making it to today. Because CRNAs, it's a pretty amazing career field and it's unique to our country. And there are nurse anesthetists in other countries, many other countries actually, but none of them are quite like CRNAs here in America. And so our origin and history is really amazing and interesting. So there's a whole course they teach you about that. So second semester, we begin the spring semester. This is going to start off with pathophysiology, which is a pretty difficult course, and it's a general pathophysiology course. Again, these classes are foundational knowledges, foundational for grad school. Of course, you took this class in undergrad. That's really foundational. Now we're talking about foundational on the provider level. So pathophys in regards to like neuro diseases and, you know, skin diseases and all kinds of things, kind of more internal medicine, general pathophysiology. We're not talking about anesthesia specific topics yet. But that class was pretty difficult. It was taught by a PhD microbiologist, and he, let's just say he took no prisoners. So he was intense. Then the second class that we took was fairly difficult. This is advanced pharmacology, but this is again not anesthesia pharmacology yet. This is like nurse practitioner advanced pharmacology. So we're learning herbal medicines that people might take and psych medicines, and we're learning antibiotic medications and things like that that are in general that are not necessarily related to heart and lungs. We did learn heart, lungs, and things like that, types of medicines, and that did apply to what we would be doing more of in anesthesia. But this was a much more generalist knowledge of pharmacology this semester. Then we went to we had fundamentals of anesthesia, which is your introductory class. This was our first class where we actually were talking about true anesthesia topics. We were breaking down the mechanics of the anesthesia machine. We were understanding what's the difference between this type of anesthesia and, general anesthesia versus, MAC anesthesia versus using an LMA versus an endotracheal tube. What's the nerve pathways that run through the vocal cords, and where's all the other cranial nerves going, things like that are just generally related to anesthesia, the core principles essentially. And if you remember nursing school, you remember fundamentals of nursing and how that was just a huge broad kind of class that taught a lot of different things. This is like that, except it's on the anesthesia level, but it's very broad anesthesia, and actually was very difficult for me. That was one class that I almost did not make a B in. I had to struggle to make a B in that class because I underestimated it. And a B is barely passing. For those of you who don't know, in CRNA school, B stands for barely passing. Anything less than a B is an F and is an immediate removal from the program, no second chances. So yeah, that was a scary class for me. Another course we took that semester was technology in healthcare. This was more about how technology affects healthcare, the type of technology we're going to be using in healthcare, things like that. I vaguely remember we were learning about Zoom and how you can do meetings and things like that with Zoom. I'm really struggling to remember exactly what elements. Computerized charting, things like that are all core elements of this. But yeah, essentially it's technology that we use in healthcare. And then the last class that semester was evidence-based research and practice. So this was our first real hard research class where they're prepping us for all the doctoral research that we're going to be doing, and we're actually required weekly to, here's a topic of this type of thing in healthcare, go research it up, find 3 different APA kind of sources that you can cite, and write us a paper about it. And that was like every week you had to do that. There would be forum posts that you would have to do in APA format at twice a week, plus one like bigger paper you would have to do about once a week. It was just getting you in the habit of constantly doing research. And I actually didn't mind having 1 or 2 type of research, non-clinical classes thrown into the mix with our curriculum, because the other classes were so difficult clinically that it would just make your brain want to melt out your ears. So you would need, while you were doing your long study stretches every day for the courses, it would be nice to break it up with something that wasn't entirely just all science all the time. So that's the way I thought about it. Some people, really resent these types of classes, but you're getting a doctorate degree. So essentially you're not going to get any doctorate degree anywhere where you don't have to do some type of higher level research or academic type classwork. That brings us into third semester. So third semester is actually the summer semester of first year. We had about a week off in between each semester, and that was about all the time that you had throughout the year, because the program just continues on nonstop for 3 years. So third semester, summer semester, we had gross human dissection, which is what it sounds like. It's the human body that you and a couple of other classmates of yours are in lab groups, and you get a body for each, like 3 of you essentially. And throughout the semester, every week, I think it was twice a week, we had to go to class, and there was tasks that you had to do to dissect out different parts of the human form and expose certain nerves and blood vessels. And it was the way for you to really learn not just anatomy through the book, but actually anatomy on the human form, and actually identify some interesting pathophys that was going on with these patients that caused their deaths in some cases. So it was a really amazing class, and I really, was so thankful for those patients who gave their bodies up to science for us to learn and to grow and to become better healthcare providers. But I will say this class was very intense. It was actually taught by a veterinarian who then became a professor later on, and he was very strict, and no mercy was kind of the theme in that class. Second class that semester was anesthesia pharmacology. So I mentioned we took we took general pharm the last semester, but now we're taking specific anesthesia pharm. This ratcheted up a notch in difficulty and was also very complicated and difficult because a lot of these types of meds, especially like sevoflurane and desflurane and these gases and things like that, you're learning about the physics of how these gases work, how they cross membranes in the body and why they're moving at certain levels, and just concepts that involve physics and organic chemistry that heavily affect how your anesthesia is working in the body, and it's difficult. It's very difficult. I would say this is one of the most difficult classes that we ever took. And it gives you foundational knowledge. It's very important for you to master because that's what you're going to build upon before you begin clinicals and you're actually administering medications and doing things on patients in the OR. You really need to understand these base level ideas of what they're doing to that body before you give these medicines to them. And then the last class we took was advanced pathophysiology. And I feel like this was more related into patho, because we took patho the semester before, but that was more like internal medicine generalist. Now this is more a patho related to this type of surgical case is going to require, this type of anesthetic is going to be involved with this type of brain bleed or this type. It was more like what you're going to actually see most often in the OR, things that are happening to patients, things going wrong, and how your anesthesia may affect or help or actually work against those types of situations. That brings us into year 2. Now, if you're exhausted yet and you're thinking, my God, this sounds horrible and this sounds like a terrible time, you're right. It is exhausting. It is a pretty terrible. That was the first year. So the first year, pretty bad academically. But the silver lining is you don't have any clinicals yet, at least at my program and most doctoral programs. They're front loaded the first year because you're going to heavily hit the academics so hard. You're going to be doing 70, 80 hours a week of studying. So there's not really, I don't know how you would pass those classes and do clinicals at the same time in first year. So year 2, they kind of do a 50-50 split. So you're still doing about 50% of work in academic type stuff in class, didactics a few days a week, but then you're doing about 3 days a week of in the OR. And the OR work, it can be exhausting. I would say second year was very difficult for a lot of people because now you're not only juggling making good grades in class because you're still going to class, you're still studying, you're still doing research, but now you're also in the ORs and you're dealing with the stress of physically being up at 4 a.m. You've got to be at clinical. You've got to be, writing out sometimes care plans and things like that to show that you're prepared for the type of cases you're going to be doing. So this is a very intense year, second year. So I would say fourth semester, which is fall of second year, we had methods of evidence-based practice, which is one of our continued research type courses. It's showing us this is the evidence-based practice, this is what the correct thing to do for your patients are, and how did you get that conclusion? What research was it based on? How strong was that research? How did you dissect that research out? It's teaching you to critically think through research as you're also starting to prepare to do your own research and try and create your own doctoral project to reflect on what best evidence-based practice there is on whatever topic you're going to pick. This is some continued research type information. And this was, again, weekly papers, weekly APA sightings of things. Every week was just another task to just keep you constantly on the move with this. You never got like a time off from any of this information. Then the next class was epidemiology. This was another class that had a lot of research involvement with it. But I found this class pretty interesting because it would teach you a lot more about how diseases are working. You're learning more about incidence versus prevalence. You're understanding more like infectious diseases and the history of how like scarlet fever or yellow fever and how things maybe wiped out populations. This helped me a lot, this class, with a few years later when the COVID-19 pandemic hit. I had a much better understanding of viruses and transmission and the numbers we were seeing on TV and things like that. And this is kind of complicated, so I understand why the general public had a lot of difficulty understanding that information at the time because I took an entire graduate level class in it and there was still some information that was difficult for me. So yeah, this class will help you a lot with that. The other classes that we took were more clinical based. So OB, anesthesia, and pediatrics pediatric anesthesia. These are two different classes that you took, and they're two completely different focuses on anesthesia, and they're complicated. So now we learned all of our foundational anesthesia knowledge, and now we're studying the very niche specialty of anesthesia type areas like OB and epidurals and maternal pregnancy and fetal circulation and things that are much more tailored for that audience and that type of situation. Oxytocin and what these drugs are doing and all of that. You learn that in that semester. And then you also do pediatric, which is another very niche, peds, just like peds nursing in undergrad. You find out like all the dosages are different, all the types, the physiology is different, their development's different. Well, guess what? Their anesthetics are all different too, pretty much. They're going to be very specific, and everything that you had just spent so much time learning for the adult anesthesia world, now you're going to be learning how to undo a lot of that and do something totally different for the kids. So yeah, that's difficult class as well. And then of course, clinical practicum, which is, like I said, 3 days a week, about 12-hour days, essentially, sometimes 14-hour days, where you would be in the OR just actually doing anesthesia with, a preceptor or someone guiding you. Usually at this point, you should not be alone in the room. You're doing more of someone standing with you, watching you, guiding you, helping you. You're intubating, you're doing arterial lines, you're probably not doing blocks or epidurals, or maybe a couple spinals at this point. You're doing more of like your entry level skills and just trying to understand like the anesthesia machine gets turned on like this, and this is how you do these things, and you understand the flow of how to communicate with a surgeon and all that, which is a lot of stress actually. Then you get Christmas, which is nice, a little break for Christmas, a couple weeks, I think maybe a week or two. And then you have fifth semester. Now, fifth semester, spring of second year, we have our first DNP project class. We had DNP project development. Now, this is very specific, where now they're giving you dedicated time each week saying, hey, you really need to be thinking up your idea on what your project is on. You really need to be coming up with the beginnings of an abstract. You need to be coming up with all of these core concepts that's going to help you build upon all of that for the future, for the following year as you're continuing to develop your DNP project. This semester, we're also doing CV anesthesia and then neuro anesthesia. So two pretty high level anesthesia specialties that are complicated. The type of anesthesia and the management you have to think about with CV and the cardiovascular system and all that's going on, open heart surgeries, things like that is not simple. And the same goes for neuroanesthesia. There's very specific things that you're focusing on. You're talking more about mannitol. You're talking more about ICP. You're talking more about the different types of ventricles and the flow, and all of that stuff is more specific to neuroanesthesia. And then we also had healthcare policy and economics, which is more of trying to understand insurance systems, how they pay you, how they reimburse, why laws were being passed, what was going on with Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, legislation that gets passed, and is it helping you or harming you? These types of things are going to be teaching you how to be a leader in the field of anesthesia, because you're going to be CRNA with a DNP, and the expectation is that you understand at least these core information, this type of knowledge, not just how to practice anesthesia, but also how is the world of healthcare around you going to shape your future practice. And then lastly, clinical practicum that semester, which is continued 3 days a week, 12-hour shifts essentially at the hospital. Then that moves you into sixth semester, which is summer of your second year. Now, this introduces in fellowship hours. So fellowship hours is going to conferences, reading magazines about anesthesia, independent research you may be doing, listening to podcasts about pathophysiology related to anesthesia. There's lots of really great high-level academic podcasts that are out there. So you have to kind of make log of these hours and this time that you're doing to kind of enhance. It's kind of saying, in your time outside of clinical and outside of classroom time, we want you to spend additional, I think it was like 200 hours this semester, maybe 240, hours you had to log and what exactly you were doing to enhance yourself on your own. It's kind of giving you a little bit of ownership over your own learning and education. So you had those fellowship hours, and of course you had your nurse anesthesia residency. And this semester it ramped it up a notch. So this is the first semester that it's called nurse anesthesia residency and not just your practicum, because you're entering into your third year now. And now they expect you to be taking on more independence. You're kind of more autonomous out there, and you really probably are running your own room at this point. The first 2 semesters, which is clinical practicum, it's probably more or less someone always paired with you. You're not really being left alone in the room very much at that point. You're being monitored, you're being watched, everything you're doing, guidance and stuff. But they really push you and prep you so that when you enter into this 6th semester, you enter into this phase where now you're running a room. Now you're responsible for patients' assignments. You're being told the night before, you've got this, and this case in the morning, and these are you need to look it up. You need to do the pre-op assessment. You need to submit it. There will always be a CRNA or physician anesthesiologist the following morning who will look over what you've done or what you've said, and they'll do a final sign off with you. And then they will usually come with you to the OR when you start your case and see how you're doing, start with induction and help you through that if you need it, or at least monitor you to make sure everything's safe and copacetic. If they don't actually walk into the room with you, they're going to be standing probably outside of the door, giving you like the feeling of independence, although you know they're right outside. And you'll also have their phone number, their cell phone number, and you'll have a close relationship with either the CRNA or the physician anesthesiologist, so that at any time you have questions, concerns, you're not sure what's going on or anything like that, you would immediately call them and they would come assist. And at this point, you should have a really good understanding of what's going on with the case, what's going on with the surgery, and also be able to see trends or things that might be happening that could be emergent, and you would be able to call someone to be there in moments to help you. But you should be feeling very autonomous and independent at this point, and you're going to be doing clinicals more than 3 days a week, 4, maybe 5 days a week now, depending on which rotation you're on, plus call. So a lot of rotations, like our pediatric rotation, had call requirements like on the weekend. Our trauma rotation also had call requirements on the weekends. Now you're entering into a much more like ownership phase where you're really responsible for these cases. These cases are assigned to you, and if you just don't show up, there's not anyone reserved to do those cases. Like, you're the one who's supposed to be doing those cases that next day. So you have a lot more ownership and autonomy and feeling of responsibility over these cases and your patients. And that's good, because this is your final year of training. And after this year, you're about to be licensed as a full independent provider. So you should have some ownership and autonomy at this level. So this semester is pretty stressful because you transition into that mode where you really need to feel very autonomous and independent and competent. And then we also had 2 other classes that we were taking called Organizational Leadership and Management and Teaching Practice Strategies. Now, these are, again, DNP courses. This is essentially teaching you to be a leader in the field. It's teaching you how to assess others, how to show them how to do their work and enhance their work. Essentially teaching you to be a manager, kind of. A lot of these are like giving reviews to other people who you're managing, and how to inspire others to do, their work, more evidence-based practice or anything like that. This is very generalist type information, and I'm struggling to remember exactly what the content was, but that's the gist of what that is focused on. And then year 3, fall semester, 7th semester, you are working on implementing your DNP project. So at this point, you've been working on it for a while now, for many months. And so they are expecting that you're nearing the end of the research portion of the project, and you're getting more onto like dotting the I's, crossing the T's, presenting it possibly, maybe even that October or November, presenting it at an anesthesia conference. If you maybe are early and done a little bit early, they encourage you to do that. Then you also continue to have the fellowship hours this semester, again, a new set of 200 maybe hours. And then, of course, clinical residency too. So these semesters, you're doing more specialties. Like I said, you're doing your OB rotations. You're doing your peds anesthesia rotations. You're doing CV anesthesia rotations. You're doing neuro anesthesia rotations. You're doing trauma rotations. Your second year, when you were doing all of your practicum hours, those are general cases. You were doing lap choles, you were doing gallbladders and appendixes removed, you were doing, maybe some interesting cases here or there, but mostly you're just trying to understand the basics and how to function in anesthesia. This year, your third year, you're doing more specialty and you're more autonomous, like I mentioned. You're also doing weekend call. There were some times that I would be on call overnight and I'd be at the facility all day and then I'd be on call that night and have to work that night. So it's teaching you, how do you function when you're a little bit sleepy? Because you're going to have to do that next year when you're out in the world as a CRNA. You're going to get phone calls at 2 a.m. and you're going to have to get up and go take care of someone who's, sick or could be dying. So it's kind of prepping you like, this is what the reality of your career is probably going to look like. This is how you need to be doing it. So that was fall semester of third year. Then you enter into the 8th semester, which is spring semester, and this is your DNP project completion. So your I's should have been dotted, your T's should have been crossed. You have a project coordinator who's one of the professors who's been watching you the whole time and keeping up with all the steps. And this is when they're finally checking off on the last element of it and saying, okay, it all looks good. Everything's matching, the IRB's okay, everything's looking good on your side. Now it's time to be presenting it. And you have to present it a couple different times, a scholarship symposium at least. Then you also have to present it to your cohort and the professors, essentially what they call defending your research. And then, it's critiqued and you get feedback on it. And then they also would like for you to present it at even a larger conference, maybe an anesthesia conference on the national level or at least the state level. So this semester, you're spending a lot of time talking about your research, presenting it, and just defending it. And then, of course, continued with your fellowship hours again, a new set of those, and then your clinical residency number 3. And then another thing that you have to remember is you're also fall and spring and summer semester of third year, you are studying for boards. They're telling you boards are coming up. They're coming your way at the end of this year. They're very intense. It's the biggest exam you've ever taken. You need to be at home using some form of studying methods to prepare for this. So I probably spent 10 to 15 hours every week for all of year 3 just studying for boards, just doing board prep material, questions, things like that on top of everything else that I was doing. And then, doing that in the spring semester as well. Or 9th semester. So this is your summer of third year. Hallelujah. You're at the end of the tunnel. You see the light. You're so exhausted that you barely can stand anymore anyway. So good that you're almost done. And this is when you take a course called Transition to DNP Practice. It's as it sounds. It's trying to prepare you for the real world of about to go out there and practice in the real world and different, 1099 topics versus W-2 versus, all these other things that are more practical knowledge of like, hey, we're about to set you free. This is what you need to know to be a CRNA out there logistically, not clinically, because you've gotten that already, but just logistically. And then also you're continuing your clinical residency number 4, which is just wrapping up your clinical hours. Say you haven't got it, you've only had 8 central lines at this point and you need 10 to be allowed to take boards. So they're going to have to find you a rotation or find you a clinical scenario or situation where you get to put in 2 more central lines. Or say you need like 2 more neuro cases and you've only had like 45 neuro cases or 48 or something. You need 50, and you can go on the NBCRNA's website, or maybe it's NBCRNA's website, and they'll have a list of all the different types of cases and skills and everything you need to do and the number of those that's required across the nation for you to graduate and take boards. So you have to keep up with that throughout the whole time you're doing your clinical residency and practicum, so that you're making sure you're hitting all of your numbers. So anyway, this is like the mad scramble at the end for you to make sure everyone's hitting all those numbers, because otherwise you can't take boards. And then so you finish out that, you're prepping for boards most intensely at this point. I would say 70 hours a week, you're probably studying for boards for a good last 6 to 8 weeks before graduation. Then you graduate and then you take boards. So that was a long answer, and that was quite the journey. And let me tell you, it took 3 years of pain, and it took 30 minutes to talk about it, but that is 30 minutes that would translate to a long 3 years of time. Was it worth it? Yes. And I would do it again. Could I do it again? I don't know. I don't know if I physically could do it again, but in my mind, I say it's worth it, and I would at least give it a shot again if I could make it. But I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that gave you a little bit of insight into what the curriculum for CRNA school looks like, what it looked like for me, and in general, what it looks like for most applicants. Because we all have to take the exact same national boards, just like you do for nursing school. So that means the quality control is pretty tight on which, between the programs, what you're all having to take. In the past, they used to be master's degrees, but that's not a thing anymore. And they're all doctoral, and doctoral degrees, pretty much DNP has a regulation on all of these different topics have to be hit, and these certain types of classes all have to be taken. So there's a lot of, quality control between that. So if you have a DNP and a CRNA, chances are you had very, very similar curriculum to what I just listed. And if you like that video, hit the like button for me. That means a lot. YouTube loves to see like buttons, and the subscribe button too. Come on back. I will post other videos in the future. This channel is not dead. I'm just delaying. I'm slowing down a little bit on posting, but I'm going to be posting on other platforms too. And then I'm going to continue doing some things here or there. No guarantees that it will be every week like some YouTubers, but I'll be around. And with all that said, that is Bolt out.